You existed long before your body ever came into being. I know how crazy that sounds in the first seconds of a video, but I ask you to set aside your skepticism for a moment, because this is the exact conclusion reached independently by the most serious researchers in human history: the Greek philosopher Plato, the brilliant early Christian theologian Origen, ancient Indian texts, the American mystic Edgar Cayce, and an academic psychiatrist from the University of Virginia who spent 40 years on rigorous science. 5 witnesses from completely different worlds. In this video, we'll piece their findings together into one chillingly specific picture. We'll talk about where your soul was before this brief life, and most importantly, why you chose to come into this specific body, to these parents, with your particular traumas and talents. If this is even partially true, it changes everything. Your struggles, your inexplicable pull toward other eras, the random people in your life, they're not coincidences. They're traces, and today I'll show you where they lead back to. Let's unravel this mystery to the end and start where the entire Western tradition was born, 24 centuries ago, in Athens.
The setting is Athens, around the year 380 before Christ. Plato is writing what will become one of the most influential books in human history. We call it the Republic. And at the very end of this enormous, sprawling work, Plato does something unusual. He stops the philosophical argument. He turns to his readers, or rather, has Socrates turn to his students. And he says, "Let me tell you a story. The story is about a man named was a soldier. He fell in battle. His body lay on the battlefield with the other dead for 10 days. Then, when his comrades came to gather the corpses to be burned, body alone had not begun to decay. They placed him on the funeral pyre anyway. And on the 12th day, at the moment he was about to be cremated, woke up. And what told his fellow soldiers after he came back was something that has been argued about by philosophers ever since. He said that when his soul left his body, it traveled with many other souls until they came to a strange place. A place where there were 2 openings in the sky above and 2 openings in the earth below. Between these openings sat judges. The judges examined the souls of the recently dead, evaluated what their lives had been, and assigned each soul to its next destination. But here is where the myth becomes something different from any of the simple afterlife stories you have heard. Because the most important part of what witnessed was not the judgment, it was what came next. He saw souls who had completed long periods of either reward or hardship, returning to a central meeting place. And there, at this meeting place, every soul was given a choice. Each soul had to choose its next life. Imagine that. Plato, the most rigorous philosopher of the ancient world, writing in his most serious work, telling you that the next life you live is one you yourself selected before you were born. Watched it happen. He saw souls picking up the lots of different possible lives. The life of a king, the life of an artist, the life of a farmer, the life of someone who would suffer terribly, the life of someone who would experience great love, the life of someone who would die young, the life of someone who would live to old age. Each life came with its full package, its joys, its sorrows, its specific challenges, its specific gifts. And the souls chose. Some chose hastily, grabbing at lives that looked attractive on the surface, kings, heroes, lives of wealth, without examining what those lives would actually contain. And many of these souls, noticed, regretted their choices once they began living them. But the souls who had learned wisdom in previous lives, they chose carefully. They examined each possible life thoroughly. They understood that a life of outward suffering might offer the greatest soul growth. They understood that a life of comfort might hide poverty of spirit. They chose not what looked easy, but what would teach their souls what their souls still needed to learn. And then, once the choice was made, each soul drank from the river of forgetfulness. And the memory of having chosen, the memory of all previous lives, faded as the soul prepared to be born again. This is the part that should give you chills. According to Plato, and remember, this is not some marginal mystic, This is the philosopher who shaped Western civilization. You chose this life. You stood before the array of possible lives, and you selected this one. With these parents, with this body, with these specific challenges that have been wearing you down, with these specific gifts you sometimes barely recognize. You chose it, and then you forgot you chose it. The life that you sometimes resent, that sometimes feels unfair, that sometimes feels like it was handed to you by forces beyond your control. That life, according to this 2,400-year-old text, was selected by you. Because some part of you, before being born, recognized that this specific life would teach your soul exactly what it most needed to learn. Sit with that for a moment. Really sit with it. And now let me tell you about a thinker who, 6 centuries after Plato, brought a strikingly similar vision into the heart of early Christianity, and was eventually condemned by the church for it. The year is around 230 after Christ. The place is Alexandria, the great city of learning in Egypt, where the largest library in the ancient world had stood, and where Greek philosophy, Egyptian wisdom, and the new Christian faith were colliding and merging. In Alexandria lives a man named Origen. By every account, he is the most brilliant Christian thinker of his generation. He is the head of a famous theological school. He has read everything: Greek philosophy, Hebrew scripture, Christian gospels. He writes more than any single thinker had ever written before him, 6,000 works by some ancient counts. And Origen teaches something that, if you grew up in any mainstream Christian tradition, will probably shock you. He taught that souls existed before birth. He taught that God did not create new souls one by one as bodies were conceived. He taught that all souls had been created together at the beginning of time as pure spiritual beings, and that the bodies they now inhabited were the result of a long fall, a long journey, and that the lives they were living now were chosen or assigned based on what each soul most needed for its growth and eventual return. Listen to this carefully. This was not some fringe Christian teaching. Origen was one of the most respected Christian theologians of his era. His writings were studied in Christian schools throughout the Roman Empire. His teaching on pre-existence was not controversial in his own time. It was, for centuries afterward, considered one possible orthodox position. And then something changed. Around the year 553, more than 300 years after Origen's death, the Roman Emperor Justinian convened what is now called the Fifth Ecumenical Council. And at this council, a series of teachings attributed to Origen were officially condemned as heresy, including, specifically, the teaching that souls existed before bodies. After 553, the Church taught that each soul was created at the moment of conception, the doctrine of pre-existence, which had been openly taught for 3 centuries, was officially excluded from Orthodox Christianity. Most Christians today have no idea that this happened. They have been taught that Christianity has always rejected pre-existence and reincarnation. The truth is more complicated. The truth is that Christianity contained these ideas openly for centuries, and then made a doctrinal decision to exclude them. Why does this matter for what we are talking about? Because it means that the idea of pre-existence is not just an Eastern doctrine, not just a pagan philosophy. It is part of the Christian tradition itself, the part that was set aside. And the thinkers who held it, Origen chief among them, were not heretics dabbling in mysticism. They were among the most serious, most learned, most genuinely faithful Christians of their entire era. When Origen looked at the soul, he saw something with a long history. He saw the soul as having existed before this body, as journeying through experiences that shaped it, as being placed in this particular life for reasons that connected to who it had become through that journey. He believed that the difficulties of your life, the things that seemed unfair, the burdens you carry, were not arbitrary punishments from an angry God. They were the carefully chosen curriculum for your specific soul's development. This sounds remarkably close to what Plato had written 600 years earlier. It sounds remarkably close to what was already being taught in the East, in the Indian tradition, which we will get to in a moment. What is striking is that Origen, working from within Christianity, with all the resources of Christian theology and Greek philosophy at his disposal, arrived at a picture of the soul that fits with what other deep traditions had also arrived at. The Church eventually closed that door, but the door existed, and what was behind it was a vision of human life as part of a far longer journey than the 70 or 80 years we experience. Now let me take you east, because in India, this same vision was not lost. It was the center of everything. In the ancient Indian tradition, the idea that the soul existed before the body and would exist after it was not a fringe teaching that had to be defended. It was the foundation of everything. The Sanskrit word is Atman, sometimes translated as soul, sometimes as self, sometimes as the eternal essence. None of these translations quite capture it. The Atman is what you are at the deepest level. The awareness that has always been, that will always be, that is currently expressing itself through this body and personality, but is not limited to them. The most famous passage about this comes from the Bhagavad Gita, one of the foundational texts of Hindu philosophy, composed sometime around the 2nd century before Christ. The setting is a battlefield. A warrior named Arjuna is about to fight a war he does not want to fight. He drops his bow. He sits down. He tells his charioteer that he cannot do this. He cannot kill the people on the other side, many of whom are his own relatives. His charioteer turns to him and reveals himself to be Krishna, a manifestation of the divine itself. And Krishna explains to Arjuna what the soul actually is. Listen to the words. They are over 2,000 years old, and they are some of the most precise language ever written about the eternity of the self. Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings. That is Krishna speaking to Arjuna. Nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. Never was there a time when you did not exist. The Gita continues. It describes the soul as something that cannot be cut by weapons, that cannot be burned by fire, that cannot be made wet by water or dried by wind. The soul, in this teaching, is not produced by the body. It is the eternal reality that uses bodies, the way you might use a series of garments. As a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. This is one of the clearest statements of reincarnation ever made, and it is part of a tradition that did not consider this doctrine controversial. It was simply how reality was understood. What is striking is what the Gita teaches about the purpose of this long journey. The soul does not move through lives randomly. It moves through them in service of something. What the tradition calls moksha, the eventual liberation, the gradual awakening to its own true nature. Each life, according to this tradition, is an opportunity to develop qualities that the soul has not yet developed, an opportunity to face challenges that will refine it, an opportunity to integrate experiences that will help it grow toward its eventual freedom. You are not, in this view, a random product of biology that happens to be conscious for 70 or 80 years. You are an eternal essence, currently taking the form of this person in this body, working on the next stage of a journey that has been going on for an unimaginable length of time. When Arjuna hears this teaching, his perspective shifts entirely. The battlefield in front of him changes meaning. The death he was about to confront is no longer the ending it seemed to be. He picks up his bow. But the larger teaching applies to you, watching this video. The struggles you are facing are not the entire story of who you are. They are a chapter in a story whose beginning you cannot remember and whose ending you cannot yet see. But the story is real, and you have been in it longer than you think. Now let me bring this all the way into the 20th century, because something extraordinary happened in 20th century America in the readings of a man who had no formal training in any of these traditions. His name was Edgar Cayce. He was born in 1877 on a tobacco farm in rural Kentucky. He had a 9th grade education. He worked as a bookstore clerk, an insurance salesman, a photographer. He was, by every visible measure, an utterly ordinary American of his era. But Edgar Cayce had one extraordinary characteristic. When he lay down on a couch and entered a sleep-like trance state, he could answer questions about medical conditions of people he had never met, about historical events, and, to his own initial alarm, about the previous lives of the people who came to him for readings. Cayce was a devout Christian, a Sunday school teacher. The idea of reincarnation made him uncomfortable. It was not what he had been taught. For years, when reincarnation began appearing in his readings, he tried to dismiss it. He worried that he was being deceived by his own subconscious or by something darker. But the readings kept coming, and what they described was so specific, so internally consistent, and, in many cases, so verifiable that Cayce eventually had to accept what was emerging from him. By the end of his life, Cayce had given over 2,000 readings that specifically described the previous lives of the people who had come to him. These are called the life readings. They are preserved in the archives of the Association for Research and Enlightenment, which Cayce founded in Virginia Beach. What did these readings describe? They described souls that had been incarnating on Earth for vast stretches of time. Cayce mentioned Atlantis, the ancient civilization Plato had described. Frequently. Many of the people who came to him, he told them, had lived during the final periods of Atlantis. He described lives in ancient Egypt, especially during specific periods when major spiritual transformations were occurring. He described lives in Palestine during the time of Christ. He described lives during the Roman Empire, during medieval Europe, during the American colonial period. Each reading was specific. He would describe what the person had done in that previous life, what they had learned, what they had failed to learn, what patterns from that life were still influencing them now. And here is what is fascinating. The readings often explained why the person had come to him in the first place. One reading described a woman who had been suffering from chronic illness for years. Cayce, in trance, described a previous life in which she had used spiritual abilities to harm others. Her current illness, the reading said, was not punishment, but was the consequence of patterns she had set in motion long ago that her soul was now working through. She did not have to accept this interpretation, but what the reading offered her was a frame, a way of understanding her suffering as meaningful, as part of a longer process, rather than as random misfortune. Another reading described a man who could not understand why he had such intense, almost obsessive love for a woman who had recently entered his life. Cayce described a previous life in which they had been deeply connected. The connection had not been completed in that earlier life. It was being completed now. The man wept during the reading, not because he believed every detail, but because the reading gave a name to something he had been feeling, that his connection with this woman was older than this lifetime. What is remarkable about Cayce is the scope of what came through him: detailed descriptions of ancient civilizations, specific spiritual practices from cultures Cayce had never studied, geographical and historical details that, in some cases, were later confirmed by archaeology. You can dismiss this as the work of an unusually creative subconscious. Many people do. But you have to account for the consistency of the readings, the specificity of details, and the fact that what Cayce described, a soul that has been incarnating for vast stretches of time, choosing lives that serve its growth, carrying patterns from one life into the next, fits remarkably with what Plato had written, what Origen had taught, what the Bhagavad Gita described. A Sunday school teacher from Kentucky, in trance, was describing the same essential vision that ancient Greek philosophy, early Christianity, and ancient Indian wisdom had described. Now let me tell you about one more witness, the most academically rigorous of all of them, a psychiatrist who decided to test all of this with hard science. His name was Ian Stevenson. He was born in 1918 in Canada. He earned his medical degree from McGill University. He became a psychiatrist. He eventually held a prestigious endowed chair at the University of Virginia School of Medicine, one of the most respected positions in American academic psychiatry. And he spent 40 years of his professional life documenting cases of children who remembered previous lives. Let me say that again, because it deserves to be heard slowly. A psychiatrist holding an endowed chair at the University of Virginia spent 4 decades systematically investigating reports of past life memories, primarily in children, primarily between the ages of 2 and 7. He published over 300 peer-reviewed papers. He wrote multiple academic books, including a 1,000-page work called Reincarnation and Biology. He documented over 2,500 cases. What did he find? He found that across cultures, in India, in Sri Lanka, in Lebanon, in Burma, in the United States, there was a remarkably consistent phenomenon. Young children would spontaneously begin talking about a life they had lived before. They would give specific names, specific locations, specific details about families, occupations, causes of death. In many of these cases, the children's reports could be checked. Stevenson would travel to the location the child described. He would find the family the child had named. He would compare the child's reported memories with what could be verified about the deceased person. And in case after case, the matches were specific. Names of relatives the child could not have known. Details about how the previous person had died. Distinguishing marks on the previous person's body that, in some cases, corresponded to birthmarks on the child's body in the same locations. One of his most famous cases involved a boy in India who, almost as soon as he could speak, began insisting that he was actually a man named Jagdish who had been killed by being shot. He gave the name of the village Jagdish had lived in. He described the family Jagdish had left behind. When Stevenson investigated, every major detail the boy had given was verified. The village existed. The man Jagdish had existed. He had been killed by a gunshot, and on the boy's body, in the exact location where Jagdish had been shot, there was a distinctive birthmark. Stevenson was careful. He was not a believer pushing an agenda. He was a scientist examining data. He acknowledged the possibility of fraud, of unconscious suggestion, of cultural conditioning. He worked hard to rule out these alternative explanations in each case, and after 40 years, his conclusion was modest but firm. He believed that the evidence he had documented was suggestive of the possibility that consciousness continues after death and can express itself in new bodies. Notice how careful that language is. He did not claim to have proven reincarnation. He claimed to have documented a phenomenon that demands explanation, and that the most natural explanation, in his view, was that some form of consciousness was carrying over. What is remarkable about Stevenson is that he brought into the modern academic mainstream the same essential claim that ancient traditions had made for thousands of years. Through rigorous documentation, through careful methodology, through the standards of contemporary science, his work has not been refuted. It has, more often, been ignored, because what it points toward is uncomfortable for the materialist assumptions most modern Western thought operates on. But the data exists. 2,500 cases, decades of careful work by a tenured professor at a major research university. And what it suggests, taken together with everything else we have walked through, is that the soul existing before this body is not the wild idea most modern people assume. It is what serious investigators across every era have consistently arrived at. If your soul existed before this body, and these witnesses, taken together, point in that direction, Then a natural question follows. What was your soul doing between lives? This is where the traditions become both fascinating and consistent, because the picture they paint of the between-life state is remarkably similar across sources that, let me be careful here, that had various degrees of cultural overlap, but were nonetheless looking at the question from very different starting points. Plato described it as a place of choice, souls reviewing their previous lives, integrating what they had learned, and eventually selecting their next embodiment. The Indian tradition describes it as a state of refinement. The soul, freed from the body, gradually digests what it has lived through. Patterns are reviewed. Karma, the unfinished business of previous lives, is sorted. And eventually, when the soul is ready, it moves toward its next embodiment based on what it still needs to learn. Origen described it as a state in which the soul, having existed eternally with God, was gradually being shaped through its experiences for eventual return to its source. Cayce's readings described the between-life state in unusual detail. He spoke of souls entering what he called planes of consciousness, different states matching what each soul had become through its lives. Souls who had developed great love would find themselves in environments of love. Souls who had cultivated wisdom would have access to halls of learning. Souls who had remained mired in lower patterns would find themselves in environments matching that. And then, when the soul was ready, Cayce described a process of preparation for the next life. The soul, with the help of beings he called guides, would review what it most needed for its growth. It would consider possible next lives. It would identify the specific parents, the specific challenges, the specific gifts that would best serve its development. Stevenson's research, while not directly addressing the between-life state, documented cases in which children sometimes reported memories of the time between their previous death and their current birth. These memories were less detailed than memories of the previous life itself. But several themes recurred: a sense of being in a peaceful place, of being aware of family members on Earth, of waiting for something or being prepared for something before being drawn into the new body. The picture that emerges is striking. Your soul, during the time between lives, was not simply gone. It was active, it was reflecting, it was integrating, it was choosing, it was being prepared. And then it came here, to this body, to this life. For reasons that, according to these traditions, you yourself participated in selecting. Which brings us to the most personal question of this entire video. Why this life? If the witnesses we have walked through are right, even partially right, you chose this life. You chose these parents. You chose this body. You chose the country and century of your birth. You chose the difficulties you have been carrying. You chose the gifts you have been working with, sometimes barely recognizing them for what they are. Why? The traditions are remarkably consistent on this. Each life is chosen or arranged based on what the soul most needs at that point in its development. Plato's myth of described it as a careful weighing of possibilities. The souls who chose wisely did not select the lives that looked most appealing on the surface. They selected the lives that would teach them what they still needed to learn. Sometimes that meant great suffering. Sometimes it meant lives of obscurity, lives without recognition, lives that from the outside would look unimportant. But these lives, the wise souls knew, contained exactly what their souls needed. The Indian tradition explains it through the doctrine of karma, not as cosmic punishment, but as the gradual working out of unfinished patterns. Each life provides the specific conditions for the soul to integrate what it has not yet integrated. The parents you were born to, those were not random. They offered the specific dynamics your soul needed to encounter. The challenges that have shaped you, those were not arbitrary. They were the curriculum. Cayce's readings were specific about this. He often told people in their life readings exactly what their souls had come into this life to accomplish. Sometimes it was a major undertaking, to develop a quality the soul had lacked, to resolve a karmic pattern, to be of service in a specific way. Sometimes it was simpler, to learn patience, to learn forgiveness, to finally accept being loved after lifetimes of running from it. Now, here is what I want you to consider. Whether you believe any of this literally or not, hold the possibility for a moment. Hold the possibility that the life you are living was selected by you. For specific reasons your conscious mind cannot remember. How would that change how you see your difficulties? The chronic pain in the relationship with your parents. What if it was not a malfunction of your life, but the precise curriculum you came here to work with? The strange affinity you have always felt for a particular country or a particular time in history or a particular kind of work. What if those are echoes, traces of who you have been before? The gift you have always sensed but never quite developed. What if you came in with that gift specifically to use it in this life and have been delaying because you did not understand its origin? The people in your life, what if some of them are not strangers? What if you have known them before, in other configurations, and the recognition you sometimes feel? The sense of having known someone for years when you have only just met them is not imagination, but memory. I'm not telling you to believe these things. I'm asking you to sit with the possibility, because if the witnesses we have walked through are even partly right, and I think the evidence, taken together, makes it hard to dismiss them entirely, then the life you are living is not random. It is selected. It is part of a story much longer than 70 or 80 years. And you are not a stranger to this story. You are the one writing it, slowly, across many lifetimes.
We've just gone through 5 very different accounts: a Greek philosopher, an early Christian thinker, an ancient Indian tradition, an American mystic, and a modern academic psychiatrist. Where does all of this lead us? To one striking picture. You, the person watching this video right now, are not just a biological body that recently appeared on this planet. You are something immeasurably more ancient. You have already been here before, and you've been learning your lessons over a span of time that our human brain simply cannot comprehend. I want to tell you what to do with all of this. Not as a mentor, but as simply as one researcher to another. First, let this settle inside you. Just allow for this possibility. Even if you can't fully believe in it yet, notice how your state changes when you entertain the thought that you chose this life yourself, that your burden was given to you for a reason, and that your talents didn't appear out of thin air. Second, start paying attention to the traces, to the places where you feel at home, even though you've arrived there for the first time. To historical errors that make everything inside you stand still. To skills that come to you far too easily. To strangers whom you recognize at first sight. According to these traditions, this is not a mind game, it is memory. The memory of that part of you which is much older than your current personality. And third, perhaps most importantly, start treating your life as a curriculum rather than a random sentence. And third, perhaps most importantly, start treating your life as a curriculum rather than a random sentence. Your trials have a clear purpose, even if you don't see it right now. People didn't enter your life by chance, and some part of you, even before your birth, looked at this whole complex scenario and said, "Yes, this is exactly what I need." You are not a random guest in this world. Here is the main thought I want to leave you with. Whoever you are and however you feel about the details, whether you believe all this literally or see it as a beautiful metaphor, this picture gives you a rightful place in the world. You have your own story, and you have a valid reason to be exactly where you are right now. You didn't just appear out of nowhere on the day of your birth. You have been here before, and what you are doing right now, in this body, is part of something truly grand. This knowledge changes everything. The meaning of our suffering, the meaning of joy. It changes how we look at the people we've lost, because they haven't vanished forever. They're simply continuing the same great journey that you're on right now. Take care, and I'll see you again soon in the next video.